Let me turn Corey down, and we're good.
That's how we start every episode.
These evergreen trees grow in dense forests and are one of the giants of the Pacific Northwest. They are surrounded by legend and have helped build our cities. They are one of the tallest trees in the world, and some believe the tallest ever recorded. On this episode of the Tree Thinking Podcast, we talk about the tree we use to build boats, airplanes, and buildings. We have tried to control their genetics and removed most of the old growth, yet it creates some of the most beautiful, iconic forests. This week, we talk about the Pseudotsuga menziesii, the douglas-fir. All right, so this week we got something new. This will be our first Tree of the Month episode. I'm pretty stoked about that, but before we get too far into it, I'm Andrew.
Jamie.
Eric.
And Corey.
And yeah, like I said, this will be the first one. We're trying to do some stuff where we've been listening to the feedback we've been getting, and one of the things that we've been getting is people want kind of a tree episode. There's other podcasts that are really good at doing this, but if you guys ask for it, you're going to get it. So
And you'll get it at a subpar level from the other places.
Check out Completely Arbitrary.
Yeah.
Great podcast.
Those guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Like normal, don't listen to Corey. And yeah, I'm really stoked about this. This will be fun. It's a little something different, a little something new, but it's 100% related to what we do. So I say we get right into it, and we got Eric here. He is a master of tree knowledge. So take it away. What do you got about the Doug Fir?
Well, hey, thanks for having me here tonight. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. This is really one of my favorite trees, and probably the most iconic tree that we have here in the Pacific Northwest. I think that's pretty fair to say. And a tree that at this point has really spread all over the globe. I mean, it's used as a forestry tree now in most of the northern hemisphere and even the southern hemisphere in places like New Zealand. So, I mean, it really is a tree that is widespread and probably, it's fair to say, integral to modern civilization. So yeah, really excited to be covering this one tonight.
Cool. Yeah, this will be a good one. And so we're going to try to do this in a few different sections. You know, we were trying to figure out how we're going to break down a tree, and there's a lot that goes into telling the story of a tree. You know, we got kind of, how do you identify what makes a Doug Fir a Doug Fir? So we'll get into that a little bit. Get into the history of it. How was it identified, and who found it, all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, some of the stuff that we deal with as arborists is the common pests, the fungus, the things that kind of attack the tree. And then we'll try to finish up with some random facts about it. So let's see. To get into it, well, let's start with ID, which I think everybody knows the Doug Fir as, you know, it is like the big Christmas tree shaped tree. It's just that classic conifer. I think most people, when they think about a conifer, the first thing they think about is a Doug Fir, that shape for the most part.
It has red needles, right?
Yeah.
If it's not doing too well, it does.
Yeah.
Well, those are the ones I'm more familiar with.
Actually, I've seen a lot of red needles after the heat dome. That
Yeah,
we just had.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah. We're in one right now, too.
Yeah.
Oh, very hot.
Yeah, we're in a literally, well, it's not a dome. The heat garage.
Yeah.
It's 100 degrees in Eugene today.
And it's 130 degrees in this garage right now.
I was about to say, we are all sweating. We had the hot episode earlier, and that was nothing compared to this.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. We'll see how this goes. We
So-
might need to take a few breaks.
Yeah. It's a sweat lodge.
Yeah.
Probably an experience.
minus the peyote, unfortunately.
What?
Cool. So, yeah, let's just start off. You walk up to a Doug Fir. What are you seeing?
Well,
Anyone?
I brought in some samples here. So
yeah.
you're seeing the blue-green foliage. That's one of the first things that I'm going to notice. And then the very distinctive, just kind of, I don't know how you describe that. It's kind of jagged. It doesn't have, like, it's a uniform, like, straight up and down trunk, but there's no like rhyme or reason to some of the branches because some are coming out at weird angles. You've got these weird reiterations going on. Some of them are drooping down. Some of them are drooping down and then coming back up. Like it's just, it kind of defies a box, I guess, that you'd want to put it in.
Yeah, I think like classic mature Douglas fir, you see like the lower canopy with really droopy branches, and then once you get really up toward the top, they almost ascend.
Yes.
Kind of totally shift.
Really, from an old growth standpoint too. I mean, when you look at the way that they're structured, it's one of the most complex trees. And you kind of touched on it, Corey, with the reiterations, the multiple tops. You know, they're notorious for kind of blowing their tops out somewhere just past 300 feet, and then they just turn into these wolfy trees with multiple leaders and just really, really complex structure, which is what I love about them.
Yeah, no. And it's kind of interesting because when they start out small, they almost look alike. All of them look the same, you know, when they're the first little saplings. But the bigger they get, the more character they get. It's like they get a personality. And if you've ever, if you're the type that's gone out and climbed and got to know these big old growth trees, they all have a different name, and the different name will kind of be along with their personality. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Different unique beings for sure. And going back to the juvenile state, in that juvenile state, again, they all do look pretty much the same. They're all very similar. And then they have that juvenile bark with those blisters going on, that very distinctive juvenile blister bark that they will lose when they get that more older bark, I guess, mature bark.
Yeah, well, when they get older, the bark kind of becomes these giant platelets that, they're not, it's not like some of the cedars where it'll shed off. They're solid attached, these big platelets that kind of run long up the tree, and kind of weave in and out of each other. But, that like the big old firs, you almost feel like you could rock climb up them.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And that bark is so thick on those old growth. I mean, it's fair to say probably anywhere from 8 to 12 inches thick on a really old tree.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is a great fire adapted response that they have. Like they're pretty bomb proof trees when they're, mature like that, as long as you don't scorch the foliage and it doesn't get too hot. Like if you just get a fire up against the base of it, it's not going to hurt it.
Yeah. And you can wear your spikes while pruning it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Bark's really thick.
Yeah. Even on those like 8-10 inch diameter ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's no worries.
Hell, you can cut little notches on your way up and just climb up.
Cool. So we kind of talked about the crown, the branch structure. Mature trees are like 80, 200 feet tall. They get taller than that, obviously, but like your typical fir.
Yeah.
I think about 200 feet is when they start really becoming a big Doug fir.
Yeah.
I would say so, yeah.
It's at about that point. Like you were saying, 300 is where they start, really breaking out and sending out reiterations. But there's the one that we took the mayor climbing in even before, and that had a reiteration at like 40 feet. That was a legitimate, went out probably 40 feet away from the trunk, and then was another 40 feet or so up.
Nice. And probably a foot to 14 inches in diameter when it started to make that vertical ascent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a small tree growing in a tree. Really.
The branch was even fatter. That's just the reiteration. That's just the reiteration. Yeah. That's such a cool tree.
Yeah. It was an amazing tree. And for urban settings, about 200 feet is really max. When we look at, we have good LiDAR data on, places like Portland and Eugene, Oregon. And we know that they're, I believe Portland has one that's probably in the 220 to 250 range, which is exceptional. I think that's in Forest Park, if I'm not mistaken. In Eugene, I think we have a few in Hendricks Park that are pushing 200, maybe just a little bit over. But that seems to be it for really an urban tree.
I may have removed the tallest Doug fir in Eugene.
Oh, man.
Probably 10, 15 years ago.
Tree killer.
Can you hear me? It seems like it's going in and out.
Yeah, we got you.
It was actually right across from where we took the mayor climbing. Okay. It was in those apartment complexes right there, and we took care of all the trees. I bet Sperry still does. And it was just this massive fir that was starting to lift the building up and do all kinds of trouble to it. So we had to go out and remove it. And it was definitely the tallest tree I've removed. And we measured it, and it was somewhere between 220 and 230 when we measured it from the ground.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was an absolute monster. I felt horrible. But yeah, I was up it, and across the street from those big ones we climbed, and those were 170, right?
Right. They were 165 and 175, I believe, the two trees respectively.
Yeah, and from the top, I was like, I am easily in the tallest tree around that I can, that you can, at a certain point, you can't really tell
Right.
how tall it is, but like it was towering over everything.
Honestly, if I had a 230-foot tall Doug Fir on my property that was pushing up my house, I would move the house.
Yeah,
I mean,
100%.
really, that tree is irreplaceable. Houses are, they're not a dime a dozen. If you've looked at real estate prices recently,
not anymore.
But it would be hard to make that justification for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting, and I'm not justifying it. I think I would not support removing that tree. I obviously did it. It's one of those things that everybody that does tree work, kind of has to grapple with at some point, is removing big, beautiful, amazing trees. And, there's a lot of factors that go into it. I've removed some beautiful trees and I've walked away from trees, and there's multiple reasons why both happen. And now I can't remember where I was going with that.
Well, talking to tall trees, Eric, you're a bit of a big tree hunter. It says the tallest one is in Coos County at 329 feet. I mean, I guess that's the tallest one that's been found.
The Dorner.
The Dorner fir or the Brummett fir, which is I prefer the name Brummett, but it's commonly known as Dorner. Brummett was just the botanist that found it, so I tend to appreciate that. But it's a big tree,
and
it's
that's the
just
tallest
huge.
one, the tallest tree in Oregon right now, I think.
I think it's the tallest fir.
It's the tallest fir,
Yeah.
correct?
Doug fir.
Doug fir,
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, but tallest known. There.
Yeah.
I mean, think about when we talk about 329 feet and actually getting shorter, right? Because the crown is clearly dying back. It has probably even above that 300 above the live foliage at this point, there's probably a good 40 plus feet of just dead top.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's declining. The trees, it's naturally retrenching itself. But think about how many trees there are out there that are in that 310 to 320 range, and at that point, we're only talking a matter of a few feet.
Right.
So it's definitely that echelon of trees that are 300 feet plus. There's quite a few still left, not in comparison to what there used to be, but relatively speaking, there are still quite a few out there in that range.
I would say, though, while those few feet aren't a big difference in an old growth, to grow those few feet up at 200 and whatever feet, or should I say 330 feet or whatever, that is a significant amount of time, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and then just getting the moisture up into the top of that, like an extra foot, like pumping it up an extra foot when you're already 300 feet up in the air, like that is just...
All right, I'm going to rein us in, though, because we wanted to stay on track here.
Oh, yeah.
We're leaning away from tree ID.
Yeah,
we're still talking about, the tree,
Yeah.
the Doug fir and its characteristics and stuff.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
We could go like native range.
Yeah.
Go native range, or we could go like the tallest ever recorded.
Yeah.
Well, let's stick to more how you identify a tree.
Okay.
Like because we started out with like what the bark looks like, you know what I mean? And there's still some stuff. One of the things I think of when I know a fir well enough, but one of the things that they say to look for is on the twigs. There's like little spots. If you look close at a twig, if you're not sure if it's a spruce or if it's a Doug fir, that's one of those characteristics. And then the needles also come out in random directions. You don't get like a grand fir, they'll be all flat, or hemlocks, but these, it just come out in every direction.
Definitely. Yep, and then they've got on the underside, they've got the white lines of the stomata on the underside of the individual needles or leaves, which is very distinctive.
What about the shape of the needle?
It's got a rounded, blunt tip, and then it's obviously long and narrow. And they come out in individual needles. They're not in fascicles like a pine would be.
Okay. And then the cones. That's a good way to ID them.
So the first thing I would think there is, of course, your true firs, which I think most people are aware that Douglas fir. Well, I should say most people in the industry are aware that Douglas fir is not a true fir.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference right there. So Douglas fir cones, they hang down, right? All true firs have upright cones. Douglas fir cones will open and then release a winged seed, whereas a lot of your true firs, they're a really dense, hard cone. And I'm talking heavy, filled with sap, like as in if somebody threw one at you, it would hurt pretty bad. They've got some weight to them, and they're really pitchy. You can look at them, and I mean, just that tight cone will just exude pitch. If you touch it, it's going to get all over. And really, what it just does is kind of disintegrates in an upright position, and then you still have that stem right through the middle of the cone. But it'll actually just disintegrate, and certainly things like wind will help, but also, I mean, it's notorious. All sorts of small mammals will go up and actually start to, chew on those cones, destroy the cones, and then just disperse that seed. It's still a winged seed, so it can still travel via wind. But yeah, it's a really tight cone on a true fir. Douglas fir are a much smaller cone. They're certainly much bigger than something like a hemlock or a redwood. They're probably a
medium,
2 to 3 inch long cone.
I think of them as medium-sized cones.
Yeah,
correct. Yeah. Yep. And then of course the little rat tail that comes out between the plates of the cone is one of the distinguishing.
Very distinctive.
Yeah, it looks like a tail and 2 feet of a mouse.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's always a funny one. I remember when Albie was first telling me that, like, yeah, you always know it's a Doug fir cone because it looks like a rat butt sticking out of it. I was like, what are you talking about? And then you see it and you're like, oh, yeah. No, there's the rat butt sticking right out from underneath the cone.
ID, native range, I guess, where are we finding this tree?
So Pseudotsuga menziesii, we're going to find all the way from Alaska into northern Mexico.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And then when we start to look at what a lot of folks don't realize, there's actually 6 species of Pseudotsuga in the world, right? And so mostly they're in the northern hemisphere in the United States and Asia. But when we start talking about menziesii specifically, so Alaska to northern Mexico, and then as far east as the Rocky Mountains.
And then once it's in the Rocky Mountains, the interior Pseudotsuga is glauca.
Variety glauca.
Correct. Yeah. So it's actually Pseudotsuga menziesii glauca.
Okay.
Which is a
variety.
A variety. Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the coastal is just Pseudotsuga menziesii variety menziesii, right?
Correct. Yep. Absolutely. And the furthest, I should say, actually, the furthest south species are actually Pseudotsuga macrocarpa, which is a big cone Doug fir. They're very hard to tell the difference, except for the cones, of course. But that's one that stretches, pretty far into northern Mexico.
So does the cone look the same, just much larger?
Correct, yes.
Oh, cool.
And still, kind of blue-green needles. Overall, when we start looking at the different species and variants, they're smaller too. When you look at the Rocky Mountain Doug fir, the glauca Doug fir, that's maybe 150 feet. Is probably would be about the biggest you would see, even in our climate. So even if you take those trees out of their native environment and bring them here, probably about 150 feet might be the biggest you'd see.
Yeah, and they are distinctively different from the valley or the coastal Doug fir. I was just in Yellowstone, and that's they're supremely populated with those. That's like pretty much the main tree that you'll see over there. And they're like, you look at them and you can tell it's a Doug fir, but it's like, yeah, this is different than the Doug fir.
And we do have, I should say, yeah, absolutely. We do have menziesii glauca native in Oregon. So yeah, southern Oregon, inland southern Oregon, you'll absolutely find that.
Cool.
Nice.
And then I feel like we can move on to history a bit because you brought up that the Doug fir, I think this kind of bleeds into history. The Doug fir is not actually a fir. Right?
Yeah.
So it's a pine. Actually.
Yeah, because it's pine family.
It's got a cone, so it's a pine.
Yeah, but it is in the pine family.
It is. Yeah. Pinaceae.
Yeah, I think so. And Pseudotsuga, that means false hemlock, right?
Correct, but it's a weird thing. So pseudo is Latin, which most of your nomenclature, of course, is going to be, but tsuga is not a Latin word. That's actually a Japanese word for hemlock. So it's an interesting. It's interesting how the kind of the semantics of how they've put this word together. I should say
the Franken word.
The Franken word. It's kind of a Franken tree.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing I heard is all hemlocks kind of the top bows over a little bit.
Yep.
And that's how you can recognize that the Doug fir is a hemlock, is because the topmost point of the Doug fir will just kind of. It's not.
No. They're very erect.
Are they?
Very straight up. Yep.
Okay. Thanks for correcting me.
No worries. I was actually, part of the reason I was thinking about that is that I've noticed some recently. You get these trees that are in that like 12 to 15 foot range, and I'm seeing a lot of these in like reforestation type settings, or if they're just in a really good spot in an urban setting, even a 15-foot tall tree can put on 3 feet of new growth a year, which is astounding. I mean, when we start talking about like percentage of height or live crown ratio, however you want to look at that, that's a huge, huge amount of growth. I mean, you could almost watch it grow. It's pretty crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez,
Wow.
3 feet.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a big push.
Yep.
You know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Should we get more into the name, like where it came from? Like, where's Doug Fir come from? How did menziesii come about? Anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can run with that one.
I think.
I don't want to take it over, but
No.
Dude, that's why you're here, dude.
Yep.
Well, so interestingly enough, it was found in the late 1700s by Archibald Menzies. He was a Scottish, so he was a botanist, but I think his day job was more along the lines of surgeon, doctor. I think botanist was more of a side note for him, but certainly one of the most world's renowned botanists for sure. And you see his name on a lot of things. But yeah, so Archibald Menzies was the actual original discoverer of it, but the common name, douglas-fir, is actually David Douglas. It was the person who really propelled this tree into what it's become today. He actually collected the original seeds. He was really an outstanding explorer of the Northwest. I mean, he had logged over 6,000 miles of backcountry just looking for really amazing. I mean, he was the big tree hunter, the original big tree hunter.
6,000 miles back in the day when you didn't have roads
Think
or
about
trails.
that.
Wow.
Think about that.
That's
And so he collected a tremendous amount of seed, took those back to, he was a Scottish botanist, but anyway, so he takes these back to Europe, and now, you flash forward 150 years, it's one of the most common, along with things like noble fir, one of the most common reforestation trees that you would find in Europe, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's very much like the original assisted migration.
Yeah, I saw something. He like transformed the British timber industry basically by bringing this tree over
Absolutely.
there. Yeah.
Really, I mean, transformed the world in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Just if you think about how many things are built with Doug Fir and how far he spread it, that's he probably doesn't get the credit he deserves for the impact he had on the world.
and he died at 35. He wasn't very old when he died.
In Hawaii. In Hawaii.
In Hawaii, yeah, kind of a crazy story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he fell into he was climbing Mount Koa, I think, and he fell into a pit with a bull in it. And it killed him. It mauled him in a pit on a mountain.
In
what
Hawaii.
What a way to go.
Yeah.
At 35.
At 35.
Well,
Well, that was a rich old
The
life
old
back then.
age of
Old
35.
age.
Right.
And that was, yeah.
1800.
Which is 90.
Yeah.
Modern day time.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
What was he doing climbing mountains at such an old age? But there was some suspicious circumstances around it, right?
Yeah, because he had less suspected money in his pocket than he had originally gone to the mountain with. So the guy who found his body and brought him back to the camp or whatever, they thought that he had set this trap for him and maybe killed him.
Yeah,
Found him and checked his wallet.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't know what happened to all that money. I think the bull got it.
Yeah, bulls need money too, man. I don't know.
Yeah, when I got there, the bull was just sitting there eating money. It was crazy.
First, he was green, so leaves. I don't know.
Yeah, that's not a way people really die anymore, I wouldn't imagine, is falling into a pit with a bull.
Yeah, I doubt it.
I think that was actually a hunting tactic, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I
It
think
was
so.
a trap essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I saw that one of the groves of Doug Firs in Hawaii is planted on his grave. So where he was buried,
wow.
there's big. I mean, it almost feels like the next time I'm in Hawaii, I should go find Douglas Firs or David Douglas's grave and go climb a tree.
Fir Grove.
Yeah.
Just don't fall into a pit.
Yeah.
Avoid bull pits.
Avoid bull pits.
Right on.
So Archibald Menzies was also a Scottish explorer, right? Botanist type.
And do they have a rivalry? Like him? Were they just I've heard multiple times that they've had a rivalry. Were they just botanists at the same time, so they consider that a rivalry, or was there some beef there?
I feel like they were doing the same kind of stuff, climbing mountain, total adventure types.
Yeah.
So maybe, egos got into it.
I was going to say, when you're traveling to, relatively undiscovered new continents, collecting plants, traveling 6,000 miles, you probably have a pretty big ego. I'm just gonna say, maybe not, but there's probably some ego stuff involved in that.
Well, you're also naming trees after yourself.
Yeah, yeah. When we're discovering new worlds, essentially, there's probably a little bit of ego.
Yeah, he was a tree guy.
Yeah.
Have you met a tree guy that doesn't have at least a little bit of ego? Come on.
Exactly.
I stumbled on a funny fact of Archibald Menzies. So he was in Chile exploring, and he went to dinner with some royalty or whatever, a fancy dinner, and they served the seeds of the monkey puzzle tree as a dessert. And he took a couple and stuck them in his pocket, propagated them on the way back to Europe, and had 5 successful trees, and basically brought the monkey puzzle to Europe through a dessert that he had in Chile.
and arborists in Europe have hated him ever since.
Yeah, exactly.
What the fuck were you thinking?
Yeah. So thank him.
All right. So, well, do you got any?
Did we talk about that's where menziesii came from, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know if we hit on that one. I can't remember because we talked about this quite a bit before we were recording, so I can't remember what we went over.
We didn't save it for the podcast.
The name has changed quite a bit, as names do over the years. I mean, we see that a lot, and especially with the advent of DNA research, we're finding trees were more or less related than we thought they were in the past. So it's kind of moved. We've actually created new genuses. Things have moved from one species to another. So, the whole classification system has changed, just like it has throughout time. But yeah, so we've had it listed as Pinus taxifolia. Of course, taxifolia, I think of taxus, of course, right? Yeah. Shaped leaves, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll have to do one of these episodes on the yew tree because that has quite the story behind it.
Pacific yew is an amazing tree.
That's another one for another podcast.
Stay tuned, subscribe, like 5 stars.
It's gone under the name Abies douglasii, which is, of course, Abies would be any of the true firs, which it's not. Pseudotsuga douglasii, which is actually one that I really like. Pseudotsuga taxifolia, and Pseudotsuga, of course, menziesii was added in 1950, and that's the one that, of course, that stuck.
Okay.
Nice.
And that was just as a tribute to Menzies?
Yes, exactly. Okay. I think it was a good way to honor both of those folks' work. So we have common name and Latin name, and they both got a stake in that. And those are widely used terms. So I feel like that was very fitting.
Yeah. That is what a cool thing to have a tree like the Doug Fir named after you. That talk about going down in the history books. But I guess your son has that, so
it goes both ways. I mean, it's here we have this amazing botanist and this amazing tree that was named after him, and then because of the impact that this tree has had on me in my life, I mean, it's really one of the things that brought me to the Pacific Northwest. I actually named my son after the tree, so it's pretty awesome to have that reciprocated. So, but it is a nod to both the amazing tree and the botanist himself. So
awesome.
I read that gentleman's life story, and it's pretty amazing when you think about that. I mean, I'm a backcountry person. I'm a big tree hunter, and I just I couldn't think of a better slice of time to actually have lived in, and to have that task ahead of you is just basically go explore the Pacific Northwest. Bring back seeds, just literally classify all these plants. I mean, that just sounds like the most charmed life I could ever imagine.
Yeah. Minus the dying at 35 from a bull in the.
Hey,
Yeah, I guess it's an occupational hazard.
It's not about the years; it's about the miles.
There you go.
Yeah, like we said, that was old.
That was old, right? And lived a long, full life.
Honestly, that was probably just a bad 15 minutes. Then it was all over.
Yeah, better that than dying of like syphilis or the plague or something, I guess.
Yeah.
How about its use as lumber? Did you guys look into that at all?
Chances are, if you're going to Lowe's or Home Depot or Jerry's or wherever you shop for lumber, you're probably buying Doug Fir if you're buying framing material for sure.
Yeah.
35% of the wood that is exported from the United States is Doug Fir. Like it is a huge, like for building, for everything. Like you can get it in long lengths, you can get it in short lengths. It'll do fucking pretty much anything.
Oh, this is kind of interesting. I'm from North Dakota, and my dad was building a garage, and I went back not too long, a couple years ago. Anyway, I go back and kind of looking at the lumber, and it was like from White City, Oregon, which was like,
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Ashland. It was like right down the road. I thought that was interesting. Just all coming from here.
They're finding a lot of really beautiful clear Doug Fir timber when they're reclaiming, or as gentrification happens. They're going into these old homes and they're finding that like some of the floor joists might be just clear Doug Fir, because at the time that was cheap, right? And that wood is incredibly valuable and incredibly expensive now, and they're finding it all over the world. I mean, even places like South America, some of these really, really wealthy homes that were built probably in the early 1900s were actually built with just beautiful clear Doug Fir. And so as they're able to reclaim that stuff, it's unbelievably valuable.
Yeah, and probably like big beams of it, right?
Exactly.
That was more of the style.
Yep, because it was the cheapest. It was the cheapest thing out there, and like today, that was the cheap building material. So they could, and it was just so abundant.
I've heard that Tokyo Bay is filled with old growth logs that were shipped over there, and then they just sank them in the bay because they recognize, like, hey, this is going to be super valuable in a while. So we're just going to ship it here and then chain it down to the bottom of the bay. It's going to, keep really good. And then we're going to have all this premium old growth, probably redwood and fir and all kinds of stuff down there.
Is it still salvageable, or is it like rotted beyond?
No, it's
No,
preserved.
if it's underwater, it preserves it.
That's nuts.
Yeah, so under there, you see these like shows on the Discovery Channel and whatnot about, people like going down into the rivers in the Pacific Northwest to pull up beams, or even just like they'll harvest a stump because just a stump has enough lumber in it to be crazy valuable.
Right.
I mean, in that bay, there's just probably thousands of old growth logs.
I don't quote me on this, but I've heard that if you looked at all of the old growth that's on the bottom of the Great Lakes, basically the stuff that came out, when they were floating big log decks down the river, what basically dropped off or what might have just come off of ships and storms, they say that there's probably more old growth on the floor of the Great Lakes than there is left standing.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That doesn't surprise me
Well,
at all.
And don't quote me.
With how
I don't have the exact articles to back that up with, so don't quote me, but that's something that I've heard, and it's I mean, people make a living of literally just pulling logs off the Great Lakes floors.
with how much
lake bottoms.
wood traveled across that lake and how little old growth is standing, I'm really not that surprised by it.
There's like 100 logs down there, and it's more old growth than we have in the entire world.
So Robin, my great grandfather, Axel Osling, came over from Norway, got off the boat in New York when he was 17, didn't speak any English, was looking for work, was just this big Viking looking dude, and got on a train, and they shipped him up to Washington into the Pacific Northwest. And then he spent the next 5 years logging basically those big old trees. So those old pictures, he was one of those guys. He learned how to speak English at a man camp.
Oh man, what kind of English is that?
Very, very expletive.
Yeah, I think we know. But yeah, so it's always, every now and then I'll, when I'm especially like removing a big tree or something, it's like, man, this was a little tree for Axel, and that's who kind of like,
with more modern tools, like
that it's crazy because what he ended up doing is by the end of his time there, he was no longer swinging an axe, and he learned how to operate the steam saws. So they had the big crosscut saws that had steam engines. So they basically strapped this steam engine and a crosscut saw onto the big tree, and then fire up the steam engine, and that back.
Oh man!
Wow. And so the thing would like rotate. I think it's what I pictured. So maybe this is just like a little kid's imagination, from hearing the story, but it kind of would rotate around the tree as the saw kind of cut on it,
Wow.
because the trees were so big and they didn't have chainsaws. It was more energy efficient to actually like strap and build a little steam engine with a blade on it on the tree than actually just swing a saw, or just, you think about a tree. Anybody who's used a crosscut saw knows that is hard work.
Oh yeah.
So.
Is that a misery whip, or is that something different?
No, that's a misery whip.
That's a misery whip.
Yeah.
The aptly named.
Exactly. But yeah. So a little piece of history that I saw, in Lynn Valley, there was the tallest tree, well, maybe not the tallest tree, the most reliable tallest tree ever recorded was 415 feet measured on the ground. Now, I was talking to Corey about this earlier today, and he found something about something that was even bigger. And I read a little splurge around, not as much, because when I started reading it, it was saying it's not very reliable. But yeah, 414. Anybody who's climbed over 300 feet knows, like,
You've
the
got
mind trip that
100 feet, yeah.
another 100 feet on top of that. Holy
crazy.
smokes.
So the less documented one, the Nooksack giant, was actually in Washington.
What'd you say?
Nooksack.
Yeah.
Nuke.
Get your mind out of the gutter there, Schlintenhart. Come on.
Not newt.
Not
Just hear the nutsack for
the nutsack. So this one was 465 feet.
When it dropped.
Jesus Christ. And 34 feet in circumference. Not diameter, circumference.
34 feet.
34 feet. It produced more than 96,000 board feet of lumber. But this happened in 1897, so 6 years before the Lynn Valley tree, because that was in
1902.
1902. Okay, 5 years. But this one, I guess it was less documented. They put a tape to it, but loggers.
But still, how tall?
465.
So
That's
let's say
incredible.
they're off by 20 feet. And when measuring something, I mean, you're measuring something pretty big. So I could see enough wave in that thing to be off 20.
You have to go around
Still.
a branch and whatever.
Yeah, still being off 20 feet, man. That is a big fucking tree.
Yeah.
And then and you think about, a 100-foot fir tree. That's a pretty big tree, but that's not a big tree yet. Not a big fir tree yet, And then you think about a 200-foot tree. And that's when you're just starting on becoming a big fir tree.
But it's two of those.
Yeah, and
Stacked on top of each
and
other.
then you get 300 feet, and you're like, wow, this is an old growth tree. 200 you can kind of be touching. You're not really old growth yet, but you're like touching a big tree. 300, you're like, this is probably old growth, or at least it's second growth, but it's fucking huge second growth, right? I can't imagine another 100 feet. Like, what are the characteristic changes that, because from 100 to 2 to 3, there's like huge characteristic changes in each one of those 100-foot sections. What the hell is the difference when you see a 450-foot fucking fir tree?
Did it just have reiterations that were like 150 feet tall?
Oh,
Probably. It could have had reiterations that were 200 feet tall. It could have had fucking old growth reiterations.
Yeah, right.
Kind of makes me wonder, like, what like sort of ecosystem was up at 400 feet? Like, did it change? That's another 100 feet in the air. Like,
Well, it's dead now. so
yeah,
it doesn't
exactly.
matter.
Like, yeah.
That's where Fern Gully was.
Yeah.
Little pixies and stuff.
But yeah, and imagine that. So like, thinking about the modern Doug fir with the tree vole, like there will be entire generations in a tree that never leave that individual tree. Like what was destroyed when that tree, that 415,
yeah.
465 foot tree fell to the ground? Like what was lost when that happened?
There could have been a little rodent or something that had been up there for, like 1,000 years of life cycles, had like been in that tree.
Evolved in that
Yeah.
fir.
An entire rodent civilization was at the top of this tree.
Something crazy like that, and is not even like out of the realm of possibility. This isn't like I'm going to stretch and try to picture. Like it is totally possible. Like crazy.
Yeah,
I saw the Brummett fir is 36-foot circumference.
It's a big tree.
Yeah.
It's a big tree.
Yeah.
that's a monster. So put that in. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and it's hidden deep.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
deep in the Coquille drainage. That's a really remote. That's probably some of the most remote coastal forest left, outside of like say Northern California. But when you look at Oregon and Washington, that's some pretty remote area down in there, and it's just tucked. It's actually really hard to find.
There are trails to it, or did you kind of bushwhack your...
Well, so the trail itself is actually fairly short. It's probably less than 2 miles, let's say, but just the network of roads to get back in there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
What happened was we kept running into all these roads that were decommissioned. So we started to actually come up from the East Fork of the Coquille heading north, and we really just got completely stymied and then had to take this long kind of ridiculous way to get to it, which actually set us back almost 2 hours. When we went to visit that tree. It was pretty pretty amazing how tucked back in there it was.
Hence it still being there.
Exactly, exactly. And the whole grove, the whole trail system. I mean, that tree may be the tallest, but it's not even close to the nicest. When we talk about structure or architecture, it's not even close to the nicest tree in that grove. It just happens to be the tallest. So,
is there a lot in that grove, or are there?
There's probably 15 to 20 in that grove. They're just will absolutely blow your mind.
Wow.
Make a trip.
Field trip.
Yep.
Field trip.
Yeah. Tree thinking hangout.
Yeah.
And so to put that height into perspective, it's one of the tallest trees ever recorded, like any kind, right? So the only one that beats it is the Australian mountain ash, the Eucalyptus regnans, which clocks in at another 50 feet tall or something like that. So I think that's close to like 450, 465 or something like that. But tallest tree ever recorded, like in human history, is a Doug Fir, or second tallest.
Wow.
Or, close to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it just shows you, I mean, when people first started logging, and that's when all the big dogs were cut down, right? They weren't measuring every tree.
No.
They were just cutting them up, getting them on a river and start shipping them down to civilization.
Right.
Was their plan. So the who knows what came down.
Right. And thinking back, before white man or before the indigenous people even came to the Americas, before they introduced fires and, the disturbances that admittedly were a lot more minimal than the Europeans brought with us.
That were actually beneficial.
Yeah, they were actually beneficial to the ecosystem. Hey, crazy thought. But, before those disturbances, like what was out there? Like what was kicking around like millions of years before white man even showed up, or humans even showed up.
Right. Just nothing but forests, to just grow. I mean, with no interruptions, really. I mean, you'd have things, of course, natural occurrences, earthquakes, forest fires, those sorts of things. But really, no disturbance. It's really the sky's the limit. I mean, it gets to the point of really, you have a tree can only translocate water so high, right? We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. So then beyond that, it just becomes the environmental conditions that are around it. I'm envisioning these 400 plus foot tall trees are probably somewhere, near the 45th parallel or just north of that, up in some valley or some ravine, where the roots are down in the creek bed or just down at the bottom of the drainage, and they've got really good protection. I just have this vision of that 415 foot tree even up in BC somewhere, just in this really kind of foggy, misty ravine that is not encumbered by high winds, not encumbered by drought, nothing like that. I mean, just absolutely able to reach its full potential. I mean, at that point, at 400 feet in the air, it's taking in water from through the stomata.
Yeah,
it's not pushing it that far. All the way from the roots.
Well, and so what you're describing are the conditions that are necessary.
Exactly.
Not optimal, but necessary for a tree to get that big. You have to have the protection from the wind, so you need to be in a valley. Plus, that's like what you're saying, where the water's kind of running down to it. So, the amount of moisture a tree like that requires. I mean, I didn't look it up, but I'm sure it's just a phenomenal amount of liquid that tree is consuming on a regular basis.
Oh yeah.
And you'll see cool videos of fog moving into old growth forests, and that's literally how they're feeding.
Yep.
So I think that's a great point in talking about big old firs or really big old trees of any kind, is that fog that pushes in and feeds them. I wonder how that works with the eucalyptus. Being in the Northwest, just being around the firs, you kind of learn a lot about them, because we work on them and we climb them, and they're what's in our backyard. I don't know much about the big old eucalyptus, so
I have to imagine that. I mean, we'll probably cover it in a future episode, but I have to imagine that they just grow so goddamn fast that it doesn't really matter. Then they just fall apart.
Yep.
Yeah, man, crazy. Well, if you're down under and you want to send us an email or reach out on Instagram or something, please tell us about those, because we want to do an episode about it, and we'd love some help from some locals to do that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're talking about this big, amazing tree, that it, other than running into the virus that is humans, just survived through so much and has made it these giant, like magnificent specimens. What are the things that can harm it? Like what do these things have to watch out for? What are some of the common problems? Right now we see a bunch of fir die back in the forests around us in the valley and in the hills around the valley, and there's the fur beetles, there's a bunch of stuff. But what do you guys think of when you hear about problems for these Doug firs?
Before we get too far in that, do you mind if we take a quick break?
No, I think this is about perfect time. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gonna take a quick beer break and then we'll be back to it.
Break.
All right.
All right. We're back. We got our beer. And I just want to say thank you to you guys. This is awesome. This is the first episode, like we were saying, that we've done like this. And it is an absolute blast. Tree ID is probably one of the weaknesses in my game. So thank you guys for coming and educating me, because this is absolutely phenomenal. This is great information.
Yeah, it's cool. It's given me a chance to educate myself. It's forcing me to do it, which is great. I love the climbing and rigging stuff, and I definitely lack on the biology, ID, all that sorts of stuff. Yeah. So this is great. It's great.
And probably one of the places where that knowledge crosses over the best for climbers is understanding the defects, how these things attack trees. What are some of the problems? I know in the Pacific Northwest here, we're seeing a lot of dead firs in the woods. There's a lot of drought stress, and these things are going to be what they're going to be when you have a drought. Mm-hmm. Any tree will have a problem. But what happens when a tree is stressed with a drought, like I think we're seeing just about everywhere in the world? Matter of fact, if you're not having drought issues, send us a message. I want to know where it is so I can go join you there.
Yeah, no kidding.
When the trees get stressed, you get these different pathogens, different insects and pests that start attacking the trees. So what are some of the ones that we're going to see attacking firs?
I think of laminated, in a forest setting, something like laminated root rot.
Yeah.
Soil-borne wood decay fungi that is just going to spread through trees, and you get that. It's literally going to spread through root grafts, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times you'll see folks, once it's identified, people will take a much bigger swath of trees than actually what they see as affected, just in order to try to prevent that spread.
And so does red ring rot fall in that? Is that a root rot that travels up into the tree?
Yeah, I think you see the red ring in, I don't remember if it was laminated root rot or I don't think it was Armalleria. It might be laminated root rot, so maybe that's the same thing.
That's the one where you see the little conchs, right? That have like the little brown shelf conchs.
That's red ring rot. Philenius. Pine. Thank you.
That's one that even before the drought was hitting trees around here, that was one you have to watch out for. And some of the scariest fir trees I've ever climbed were just infested with the red ring rot. And what makes them so scary is when you're up, you climbing up them, and I'd always tie into other trees before I go up these things, but they'd start moving in weird ways. And I think it's because what it does is it rots out, and I'm going to, the biology is not my strongest, is it the space in between the rings that travels up and down the conifers. I think it feeds on that. And so it allows the tree to bend in these weird ways. You'll look under you and it'll be bending in like 3 or 4 different directions all at the same time. And it just feels horrible.
Oh, man. Yeah, so that one, the red ring root rot, it has actually spread by the wind, and it'll land on stub cuts, and then it'll stub cuts, wounds, twigs, whatever, and then it'll germinate from there. So it's not a soil-borne like the laminated root rot.
But yeah, well, and that'll make sense because you'll see a lot of the conchs on the the decay, and I didn't know if it traveled up and then found those stubs to come out on, or what the deal was. But that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because you don't usually see that associated. Like it's not. You usually see those, starting at about 10 feet and then all the way up the trunk, right? It's not. You don't usually see anything around the base.
It's not a butt rot.
Yeah, it's not a butt rot. Okay.
Nope.
One of the things that, not necessarily in terms of disease necessarily or pest, but one of the things that we're seeing here recently, of course, is the leaf scorch, the needle scorch from the heat dome that just happened recently. And, we're obviously broadcasting here from Eugene, Oregon, and I live along Highway 58, which is travels southeast out of Eugene, goes through another town called Oak Ridge. And when we look at this stretch between Eugene and Oak Ridge, after that recent, I believe it was 111 degrees in Eugene. I don't know the exact. It was a record-setting day in Eugene. All of these trees on the south and west faces got completely scorched. I mean, completely scorched, and that's terrifying to me because I've seen it. As I mentioned on Highway 58, and then I was up in the Coast Range. I was really shocked to see it there because I think of that as being a much cooler, maritime climate. But that heat still affected them, even up in Astoria.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm seeing like anywhere from like on the low end, 25% of the foliage is burned, and in a lot of cases, up to half the foliage is burned. And I've seen a couple trees that just completely died in that heat period.
Wow.
I mean, just dead.
Mostly just seeing like the new growth that got scorched.
It's
for the
scary
year.
because it's the
It's
new
getting
growth
farther than
and the previous year's growth.
Yeah.
Basically just, again, there's a whole spectrum of severity, but everything from new growth to a few-year-old growth, needles that just have hung on for a few years and haven't dropped yet.
Yeah.
And seeing it like in mass. I mean, I'm talking whole hillsides of damage. And of course we're into fire season, so the ladder fuel effect that creates now with these, when you have half of a tree just completely scorched, it's terrifying. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
I remember seeing it and thinking, I mean, usually I was seeing it right along the pavement, but I did a
course.
job up in Salem not too long ago, and it was just out in a field.
Yep.
Like same kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
Man,
Yeah,
that's so
scary.
bad.
That particular stretch that I'd mentioned, between Eugene and Oak Ridge, once you pass the Lowell and Dexter area, so the kind of the maybe 25 mile to 50 mile point there on Highway 58, that's in Black Canyon, which is normally very shaded. It is situated kind of east to west. It's an east to west running canyon, but it's just the sides are so steep that there's not a lot of sunlight that gets down in there. I mean, it certainly gets in there when the sun is overhead, but I think that was part of the problem too. Those trees are used to a fairly moderated climate, a very mild climate that doesn't change a whole lot. Lots of shade starting at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the summer times, and I think that heat just pushed them over the edge. They were almost like you could say tender or something. Like they're not used to that.
And you get the river that flows right through there, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
I haven't
Willamette runs right through there.
Yeah, I haven't been up there recently. How's that flowing?
Good. I mean, there's plenty of water in it. Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
that's good to hear.
enough. We had a decent
Yeah.
snowpack last year, and but yeah, it's scary to see. Like, what's that? I mean, here we had that heat dome a few weeks ago, and now we're back up to 100+ degree weather as we're speaking right now. And like how it's a matter of like frequency and dose. Like how hot does it get, and how often does it get that hot, and what kind of effects are we going to see from that? That's really troubling. I got to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because we do see the 100-degree, like this is pretty typical in August. We see 100-degree, we'll have a week of like 100-degree, but like you're saying, that dose, we don't see 100 degrees in June. Like that just
Ever.
it doesn't happen.
No.
But like that compounds, and then we're probably not out of the 100. We'll probably have another one in September or beginning of September. Probably we usually have another heat wave before
when was it that it got up to like 116?
June, middle of June, like 13th, maybe the 20th.
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
crazy for it
We
to
had
get that
yeah.
hot that early.
In Eugene, Oregon.
In Eugene,
Yeah,
Oregon.
Eugene, Oregon.
exactly.
Just the Willamette Valley. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Crazy.
And so one of the things that when there's stressed trees, you get the Doug Fir Beetle. What did you guys find about the Doug Fir Beetle?
it kills Doug Firs.
I found the flathead fur borer. Is that the one that's kind of the main culprit around here? Do you guys know?
Good question. I have to be honest. I'm not well versed on borers.
Yeah. I could just read off my notes and we can just
Yeah, let's,
Sure,
let's
yeah.
do
go
it.
after
you
it.
bet.
So the flathead fur borer is a wood boring beetle that behaves like a bark beetle. So it feeds under the bark instead of excavating galleries in the wood. So typically, wood boring beetles aid in decomposition of wood and tend to be secondary. They don't kill trees on their own, but the flathead fur borer can act like a primary insect and kill healthy trees.
Which sounds like it's that.
That's the one.
And
That
and so
sounds like
that's
it's
what
one.
I was picking up on it also is that, a lot of these things when the trees aren't stressed, you're going to have them in the forest and they're just going to be working on the kind of trees that are already have something else wrong and kind of cleaning out the weak stock. But then when you are in a situation like right now where all the trees are stressed, you get these huge population spikes, and that's what ends up devastating forests. Is
There's a lot of food availability, so they're going to reproduce faster. These individual each one of these individual trees isn't put on a shell wall that they're used to every year, and so they're going after that new growth, and that's kind of where they infiltrate the tree and then just kind of strip it from the top down.
exactly. And what happens is when you get that spike in a population, you end up with more beetles than there is food for the beetles to eat. And so then they start going after healthy trees because there's just so many of them that they got to eat on something. And that's why all of a sudden it becomes a catastrophe, because, it goes from, this kind of an ecosystem where they're serving their role to this just disaster situation where it's just a feeding frenzy for them.
Yeah, and they're probably, their life cycle is like up a year, can be more. I imagine it's in warmer climates that they're lasting longer. They're not dying off in the winter or whatever. So larger populations just from that too.
Totally.
Warming climate.
And we'll see a lot more of that with a warming climate. That's the other thing.
Yeah, it's just starting.
Yeah, and I think of like comorbidities, right? We talk about that a lot with COVID, right? But that applies to trees as well. And I think about how many times you've been asked, well, what killed the tree? Well, a lot of times it's more than one thing. It's a compound of multiple circumstances, right? Yep. So maybe you have drought, right, which might stress a tree out. Now it's more susceptible to all sorts of different disease, insects, and it can be just a myriad of things that just, death by 1,000 cuts just chips away at the overall health of the tree.
Everything I was looking at for prevention is like promote tree vigor. Like make this thing healthy as possible. Give it plenty of water. Nutrients.
It's kind of interesting on that note, and it's not a Doug Fir thing, but I had that birch tree in my yard for the longest time.
Oh yeah.
And I planted it right next to the hedge, and it was when I had no other trees. I had just moved in, and someone was removing this birch because it had bronze birch borer in it. It was right in the middle of a hot yard. And I had just moved in here like a week ago, a week earlier. And I was like, I need a tree or something. So it was small enough. So I was like, I'm just going to take this and I'm putting it in the ground because at least I'll have something in the ground. And I put it in this really wet spot, hoping that it would just start absorbing that water. And sure enough, it was in the shade of the hedge and it had tons of groundwater there. And all of a sudden, it started healing all the old damage. And I lost all signs of bronze birch borer in it. Probably for about 5 or 6 years until it got tall enough so it was over the hedge. And all of a sudden it was in the direct sunlight again. And it got stressed again. And then the bronze birch borers came back. And it was just like, oh, that's how you battle these things, is you just give it an environment where it's really healthy. And the tree can do it on its own if you just give it a chance. And it makes so much sense. If any of us are hurt from something, what do? You get comfortable. You lay down. If you have a bum ankle, you quit running on your ankle. But the trees can't do that right now, and that's why it's just running out of control.
Right.
Yeah. So I was looking it up a little bit, and the Douglas-fir beetle is different than the flathead borer, but very similar. Pathology, very similar systems. They're going after drought-stressed trees. Ones that have root rot disease, overcrowding, like all of these contribute to it. But again, drought is the big thing. So they're very much the same as that insect. Very similar like pathology and.
I wonder if their life cycles are similar, because I think that's important to know. I wrote some of that stuff down because you'd get like people worried maybe and it's a good question. If a fir was killed by a beetle, you chip it. They want the wood chips on their property, but they're concerned about the beetle being in there still or whatever, get all the wood out of here.
Yeah.
So I think like knowing the life cycle is kind of important. And it says they live up to 1 year. It can be longer. We kind of touched on that. So they emerge in spring. This is the flathead fir borer. Maybe the one you're talking about is a little different, but they emerge in the spring and feed on the needles. Then they'll move on to their host tree. And there they lay eggs in bark crevices, and as soon as the larvae hatch, they immediately start boring into the bark. And once they're in there, they feed on cambium and phloem, but don't really enter the sapwood. And late summer is when they move to the outer bark, and they overwinter in little pupal cells. Then they emerge as adults the following spring, and so on, so on.
Gotcha. The only difference with the Doug Fir Beetle is they'll actually lay their eggs inside the gallery. So they'll burrow into the tree, lay the eggs as they're, girdling the tree from the top down, lay the eggs, and then those eggs will then continue the galleries with their life cycle kind of thing. But, again, very similar morphology to yours.
Typically with the fur beetle you're talking about, what was it called?
Douglas-fir beetle.
Okay.
And I'm not even going to try it in the Latin.
Yeah.
No, I want to hear it. What is it?
Dendroctonus Pseudotsuga. Yeah.
Oh, good job. You got it
That was
perfect.
easy.
Yeah,
That
you got
was
it
easy.
perfect.
Basically,
Typically you see in the tops die first, like you do with the bronze birch borer.
Yeah. Because as they girdle the tree, as they're hurting the tree, the tree's going to stop pushing the nutrients further up, or they'll literally mechanically destroy the ability for the tree to move nutrients up to the top.
Okay. Cool. What else?
I don't know what other problems do these things face.
So let's talk about the biggest problem: chainsaw blight.
Chainsaw blight.
I think that might be the single biggest killer of Doug Fir. No exaggeration.
All right.
Yeah.
So what are the worst excuses you guys have heard people wanting a beautiful fur removed for?
Pruning to allow clearance for a solar panel.
Well, okay, so I understand that one
Removal for a solar panel.
because at least they're trying to upgrade to a solar panel. You know.
But you're killing a tree to do it.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
there's
totally.
just something about that.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a tough one. And so the other weekend I did a Doug Fir job that hurt to do in some ways because it was a topped fir. Now, I did not top this fir, right? It was an interesting one because it's like everything you're against.
Andrew definitely topped this fir.
But the crime has already been committed, right? It was somebody that I know in town who doesn't work tree work anymore, but I remember him from when I first started, and yeah,
There's a little cowboy with a.
It was a bummer because they had this beautiful property, and they were talking about this amazing oak, and you could see where the oak was. There's still this giant stump, and you could see how the other trees around it.
Oh no!
And he's like, "Oh yeah, so and so just removed. A couple years ago after the ice storm, removed the tree, and he told me how dangerous it was and how lucky I was it didn't come down on my house." And so it was so kind of him to come and remove that tree, and it was just like, you motherfucker. Oh, by the way, if you're selling beautiful tree removals out of fear, fuck you.
Yep.
Yeah,
All right, I'm just gonna say that right now.
I'll second that.
Yeah, like
you can talk the talk like it's to feed my family. If I don't do it, somebody else is gonna
Yeah.
no.
yeah, and you know what? Reach out. Let's have a conversation. If that's seriously something that you do, like I'm not gonna just say fuck you because I want to understand it. I've had many conversations, and call in. I will have you on the show and we can talk about it. Like, because that is one of my pet peeves. There is always another way. And sometimes, like I said earlier in the show, I've removed some beautiful trees. And so if you tell me the right story and I'm on the same page as you, or not even 100% on the same page, but enough to say, this is your tree. You are 100% sold. This is where we're going. We can have that conversation. But if you're the person that's selling the fear, if you're around the corner from my house, there's this big, beautiful maple, and we removed a tree in the backyard. As a matter of fact, I think at least 3 of us were on that removal. And they were telling us about how a local arborist, Eric knows who I'm talking about, is a guy that has a heart attack every night because of all the debt he's into. I'm not going to say any names.
Yep.
But when these people first moved in, he came out and was like, "Oh, this is a dangerous tree. It's got to go." And it's a big leaf maple. I'll point it out to you. We can see it from when we walk out this door. And he's like, "Yep, it's got to go. It's going to be $5,000." Oh my God, I am so glad that they were smart enough to keep it. On the 4th of July, I was over at their place, and we were in the driveway, and everyone's hanging out, sitting out. We're doing the social distance thing, and we're all sitting out in the driveway, and we're all in the shade of that tree. And I was just sitting thinking that motherfucker wanted to cut this tree down so he could get $5,000.
And we've got some serious Jippo tree services here in town.
Yeah.
It's
when,
so frustrating.
when you really break it down, so okay, you get $5,000 for that tree, one-time removal, and then you get whatever else for the stump grind. That's it. Like that's your paycheck. It's done. It's not going to pay you anymore, right? If you come out and you prune that tree every 3 to 5 years, 1,200, 1,500, whatever.
Yeah, it's a big tree.
It's a big tree. Like you are making you're serving the property owner better because they have a big, beautiful tree there that's not going to fall apart and fall on their house, right?
No,
you're addressing
we're beyond property owner. It's the whole fucking neighborhood. It's the city. We need those trees to cool the city. I mean, we could talk about heat island effect, and that might be a whole nother episode in and of itself because I know people
we're
here.
100-degree weather right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that tree is over this street, so it's a prime candidate. But anyways, we don't need to go down that road right now.
We digress.
Yeah, this is Doug Fir. It's not Big Maples.
Yeah.
If you want to have that conversation with me, give me a call. If you sell tree work out of fear, I would love to have a good conversation. And I'm not here to beat up. I want to understand. That way we can figure out how to help other people find better ways to sell tree work, because there are much better ways to sell tree work. I know people that have been, what they do is sell tree work in a positive, non-fear way for the last 30 years. And I will have them on the show, and we will talk about different ways where we can do it, and we will up your game on how to sell tree work. So if you need it, give us a call. We will have that conversation.
The big difference between perceived risk and actual risk.
Yeah.
And being able to parse those two out is really important when you're in this game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do the common problems.
Thank you,
segment.
Jamie.
This heat's got him
Reel us
so
back
fired
in.
up.
He's ready to go, man. He's ready to fight.
I don't even need the whiskey right now. Let's go.
He took his shirt out. He's just shadow boxing in the corner over there.
But the big reason I wanted to do the main reason I wanted to do the common problem segment is to help people identify the actual issues that are going on. So say we go back to like laminated root rot, which you mentioned, like how do you identify that? How do you know what's going on there?
It's very similar to other root rot type diseases where you're going to initially notice the dieback in the crown, right? And that's pretty common, and that's probably a statement that we should make. It's relevant to certainly Doug Fir, but really any tree. That's kind of a basic 101. When you start to see crown decline, the first place you want to, and it's a little counterintuitive, but when you see dieback in the top of the tree, the first place you want to start really looking for the problem is actually in the roots, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that would be one of the definite signs.
As a matter of fact, anytime you're diagnosing a tree, start out by looking down. Mm-hmm. That's the number one rule.
Yep. Look down, look up, look at the whole tree, look at the whole picture. If you miss, one little thing, that could be part of the diagnosis. If you don't look at the base closely enough and you find a fruiting body, but you look up at the tops and you see all this dieback, you could misdiagnose it because you haven't seen that one little fruiting body that's buried at the base.
All right. I think it was with laminated root rot that the fruiting body is like rarely observed, so it's not something you're going to see. So I'm just wondering, like, how the heck can I tell that this is laminated root rot? I saw it rots just below the root crown. The reddish stain, which is why I thought maybe that was the red
the red ring rot
that you were talking about, but I think that's something completely different. It sounds like.
And with firs, don't you get a bunch of sap dripping out of the trunk?
Usually with basal, or butt rot issues, yeah.
That's it. Or a bulge. You see a big bulge at the base and a bunch of sap leaking down.
Bulges are bad, man. Bulges are bad.
In
this context.
White-gray mycelium on the bark surface of the roots, reddish mycelium between layers of the rotted wood. And like I said, there's the flat, like gray-brown fruiting bodies, but the note said that it was infrequently observed, so it just must not be something you commonly see. Maybe it's like under the roots or something, on the underside, I don't know. I don't know if that helped anyone identify laminated root rot, but how about Armalleria? You guys know much about that?
Now, Armalleria might be the one where you get the pitch dripping.
It seemed like from all the ones I was seeing,
both.
Like that. If you're seeing it push resin out of the base, then there's a butt rot going on. But figuring out which one it is,
Fair enough.
might be a little difficult.
But I would say if you've got a butt rot going on to the point where it's bulging or you got sap pushing out of the base, you probably have a problem and it's worth further investigation.
And Armalleria is also called honey mushroom. Honey mushroom. So you'll see the little honey mushrooms. You know, they're fairly distinctive. It's a small cluster of a bunch of different individual mushroom caps, and those do have a fruiting body, so they're pretty readily available.
They come out in the fall. They got like a goldish brown cap with a ring on the stem.
And I believe they're edible.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I've never eaten one.
I never have either. A tree thinking experience.
Yeah.
I guess that's gonna have to
As much
happen
as
this
I
fall.
just grab mushrooms off the ground, I've never
never eaten that one. Well, you eat mostly off of dog poop. Right?
I think it's actually cow poop.
Oh, right. Okay. Right.
Oh,
That's why he's more
mushroom.
It's like, guys, I'm not feeling anything. I just feel really sick.
You're gonna have to eat more of that, man.
So Armalleria, also called shoestring rot.
And that's because you see the like white lines of the fungus traveling through the fibers in the rotten wood. I think
Mycelium.
the mycelium. Yep, the mycelium network.
And I think, so here, if you get peel back the bark at the base, you'll see the mycelium. It's like a fan-shaped sheets of mycelium, and that's like a tall tail, or that's a way to tell that's what you got going on.
Unfortunately, after the tree has failed, one of the common things that I've noticed with Armalleria is it's a root decay fungi, and you get in to these roots, and basically what you realize is that kind of the root plate there has just been completely destroyed by decay. But once you actually feel the texture of the wood, it's really spongy. And kind of viscous. It's almost like a thick, gritty toothpaste.
It is.
Huh.
Yeah.
That the wood has actually been just reduced to. I mean, it's pretty surprising. I've seen it, of course, in douglas-fir and things like Oregon white oak. A lot of times, especially after disturbances in the roots, a lot of times Armalleria is widespread. I mean, it's endophytic. It's in the soil in most places, and it's just kind of there waiting for its opportunity, right? And then it moves in. And I've just seen that so many times where you get into these big fir trees, or you get into these, whatever tree has failed from Armalleria, and you get in there and you can, just the texture of the wood right there at the buttress is just, it's like thick, gritty toothpaste. That's the only way I could describe it. I mean, it's just, it's surprising. And you think about it, it's like, and that's the one exception I would say where, for whatever reason, Armalleria is not always as evident in the canopy of the tree.
Okay.
There have been times when I've seen trees that have failed from Armalleria that really didn't show a lot of crown symptoms, and that's kind of a little bit distressing as well. You want to kind of be really mindful about changes to your grade, things. If you're introducing water to an area that previously wasn't.
Sprinkler
Wet,
systems
things
around
like that,
Oregon
so
white
sprinkler
oaks.
systems, or you're getting in, you're messing with the drainage on your property. That can certainly lead to that, but that's one of the common characteristics of Armalleria. But a lot of times you find it after the fact. I mean, it's kind of a post-mortem symptom, I guess I would say.
Yeah,
I remember hearing a while ago that Armalleria, the honey mushroom, is like one of the largest organisms on Earth. I think it's somewhere here in Oregon. There's
There's different species.
It is
multiple species of.
Yeah. This one.
Armalleria.
I've
This
heard
one's
that same thing. That Armalleria is the biggest organism.
Yeah, I have two, but this is Armalleria Malea.
Okay.
Mellea.
Why you got to bring my daughter into it?
Wikipedia did, not me.
So I think another one I saw was black stain. Are you guys familiar with that?
I am not.
Me neither. Just this little bit of research.
But
It's not one that I've heard of very
Now I'll
often.
teach you.
we'll stab in the dark at it.
Well, what's one another common one?
Well, the red ring root rot. I mean, I guess we can talk about that a little bit. So we talked about the fungal puffs. Well, they look like puffs, but they're fungal fruiting bodies, right? And that's usually, again, it's kind of like the Armalleria. It's kind of a post-mortem thing. Like the tree's already dead by the time you start seeing the puffs, or it's well on its way out. That's kind of, it's one of those things that you can't really. It's best to remove those when you see those, so that you're reducing those fungal fruiting bodies, and it's not spreading to other trees in that same population. But once the tree has got it, it's kind of game over.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience with them. I don't know if anybody else has a different experience with that.
It's well on the way.
It's well on the way. Yep. Yeah, and those are some funky trees to climb because they're just dead and funky.
Those are some other ones that kind of get a little squirrely under you.
It's a little bit of a pucker factor going on with those.
Well, does anybody have any other common issues with these furs before we get on to just random facts?
I mean, failure profile, I guess. Like, what's a common?
Oh yeah, good.
What happens to these trees? Limb failures.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot.
So
of
many.
failures.
All the limb
storms. The storms that affect these the most that I've noticed are big windstorms. And particularly if you have a big rain and wind event. So the roots get saturated with soil, and then you get hit by a big wind. Those are the storms that I can remember just cleaning up furs off of houses.
Yep.
It's like full tree failure.
Full tree failures. Sometimes you get 4 or 5 trees stacked on top of each other, kind of stuff.
And then just by themselves, they do shed those limbs all the time, like hot weather, rain, wind, snow, ice. Like they'll just
So how do you combat that? What can you do about that?
cut the tree down. Big trees are scary, Eric. Come on.
Yeah,
we already covered this.
you don't want them over your solar panels.
You don't want to. No, you don't want to over your solar panels. So how can you combat that, Eric? I think you've done something about that at your property, haven't you?
I have, yeah. I have a bunch of Doug Fir on my property, and they were unfortunately planted. I think the closest one to my house is literally 6 feet away from the foundation, and it's over 100 feet tall. And I'm fine with it. It's not affecting the foundation of the house at this point, but it does shed branches, right? And so we use a technique called tipping, not to be confused with topping, tipping, right? And it's super tedious, and I think that a lot of folks, here's the deal, it's kind of a hard thing to sell because you're not taking a lot of material and you're spending a lot of time doing it, right? Yeah. And that, for somebody who doesn't know a lot about trees, that's kind of a hard thing to understand, right? But I go up in these trees, I'll climb them every few years, and I literally just go through them with a pole pruner, and I'm taking tips, and we're talking like thumb-size cuts that might be 2 feet long max.
Yep. Literally
off the terminations of every single branch.
Wow.
And it just keeps these fir trees their branches from becoming overextended, That's really where you run into problems. It's when fir trees, they're fast-growing trees, and they want to spread really wide, especially if they're out in the open and not in a grove setting, right, where they're competing for sunlight. Those branches are going to grow 40 to 50 feet long easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way to combat that is literally just to go over the tree and just go to town with a Fred Marvin or, pole pruner of choice, whatever you like. But it's amazing. And I do that all the way up to the top of the tree. In fact, in my particular case with my trees, because they're so close to the house, I actually don't want them to get much taller. So I actually take that terminal bud off the top, and I go up every few years and kind of clean out because it's going to try to grow, multiple tops.
You're making giant Christmas trees.
Yeah, you're like a hedger.
Yeah, it's like a giant hedger. Yeah, I know. I feel like I should get one of those utility line saws.
Oh,
from helicopters. If I could get one of those that was like slightly angled, it would be just perfect. But no, the trees look great, and you don't notice the pruning at all.
That's
but basically what it does, it keeps those limbs, everybody who's in this industry knows, when you're doing weight reduction, you don't really need to take a lot off to make a big difference.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it just keeps those, the nice thing is it keeps those limbs in check, but then everything behind that, all those latent buds are going to start to pop.
Yep.
Doug Fir, if you, so they're not great about setting new buds on non-green wood, right? So like if you prune a branch really heavily and you prune past all the green, it's not going to like completely resprout, right? But what I found though, like with edge effect Douglas fir, or when you're doing tipping, if you're methodical and don't get too carried away, they actually will sprout off of trunk wood, or branch wood, provided that you leave some green. And it's a slow process, but unfortunately the property that I live on was logged. But when I look at the edge effect trees on the side, we've been in this house for about 15 years, and the amount of new branches that have sprouted off the Doug fir on that edge effect is amazing. I mean, we're talking like a tremendous amount. I mean, a whole half of a canopy, essentially. So yeah, they actually will resprout really well, and that gives you future spots to cut back to, right? When you want to do weight reduction, you start doing it just really slow, a little bit at a time, and all these new buds will sprout, and then you can actually start to work those branches. So if you start with a fir that's already gotten pretty overextended, that's my advice, is just start nipping back really slow. It's a multi-year process, but you can start working those branches back. And honestly, it's amazing that fir tree at this point does not lose branches even in the heaviest snow, wind, whatever.
That's cool.
I've got a half dozen of them that are.
That seems like it almost ties into a conversation we were having earlier. Maybe so the $5,000 that you would have either saved or had somebody to come out and remove that, right? That's consistent pruning that you're doing every 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, I do it about every 3 years.
Every 3 years, yeah.
Yep.
Crazy. Paycheck every 3 years, just it's there, and you're taking care of a tree, and you're helping the property owner.
What's it like at the cut? Does it like sprout out?
Nope.
'Cause I know like with a redwood, I've seen that happen where it kind of
sprouts out.
sprouts
This
out.
cluster.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get some sprouting behind it, right? So you're going to look. It's going to basically focus that energy on the branchlets just behind the cut.
I mean, that's kind of good,
But
right?
it's
A little
fine.
mass dampening behind it.
That's
yeah.
what you're
It's
looking to
great.
do.
It's
And
great.
I've seen those trees, and I didn't know that's what you're doing to them.
You'd never guess.
You know,
that
and
any of the
I
trees have been pruned.
that's the type of stuff a tree person looks for. You know,
Right.
The two things that
Well,
I
you've
would
done it with your pine right out here.
yeah, except for that's a little more extreme. Yeah. The two things I would say about that is a great way to sell that is to remind people that the way leverage works
Yes.
is if something is going horizontally out, if you remove the furthest 10%, you're actually removing 50% of the pull down on that branch.
Yep.
And that's not trees, that's anything.
Well-
That's just the the way physics work. And the other thing is if you're going to do that, don't make too big of a cut. It's really tempting to
It
make a
is.
big cut because it's easier. It's a kind of a pain in the ass to get, especially up high, to do that.
Yep.
And if you make a big cut, it'll start leaking pitch.
Yep.
And that can be a problem because a place a lot of people like to do that is over their driveway because they're worried about something failing on their car, and you don't want to start dripping pitch onto somebody's car because then you get complaints for
Nice.
sure.
Yeah.
But those are
Hot
the
tip.
two things that come
Yep.
to mind when about those.
And that would have, to answer your question earlier, that would have been the worst reason to remove a Douglas fir.
Yeah.
I recently had turned down some folks that wanted to remove a Douglas fir because it was dripping pitch on their deck.
Yeah. I've done the same thing.
And it's like, you look at it, there's 20 drops of pitch on the deck, and they're saying it's unusable, and it's like, no, sorry.
Buy an awning, sorry. Buy
Yep,
it.
exactly.
I know a guy
There's-
that'll sell you on fear.
Yeah, there's lots of them.
Yeah.
The pitch is acidic. You got to be careful.
It's the cure for COVID.
Yeah.
That's what I've been telling folks.
Just go roll in it a little bit, you'll be fine.
Yeah. So that's a great kind of tip though, for it's something you see quite a bit is people wanting to condense big fir branches. And one thing that really stuck with me, what you said, is taking little bits over time. When I think of prunings like that, when they want a branch condensed, I like to think about doing it over 5 or 10 years.
Mhm.
So don't sell them like, oh yeah, I can bring it back all at once. Sell them about, we'll bring it back a little bit, we'll bring it back again, and that way you have something to. Because why that pitch is coming out and dripping is because the tree thinks that there's still branch there, so it's pushing all that out there to fill that branch, but there's no branch there, so it just drops it on your car. But if you slowly bring it back, it puts on that new growth. Then it's going to be pushing that pitch into that new growth instead of out onto the car.
Here's another thing I've heard is people want their trees limbed up, like aggressively limbed up because they're afraid of the branches failing. But actually, if you're reducing the weight on the lower ones, they're going to
Bingo.
protect you from,
Mhm.
a small limb coming max velocity from
Yep.
the top and smashing through your,
Such a good point.
roof
Yeah.
or whatever. So
It's a safety. It's a literal safety net of branches.
Yep.
Honestly, so when I'm even just deadwooding a fir tree, right? So now this just gets down to personal choice. I spend a lot of time out in the back country. I love the look of like a natural Doug fir, right? I live out in a forested area, so my trees, when we start talking about deadwood, I'm leaving stobs, like 3 foot long stobs, and it's like if I come across one, I give it the kick test. If I can kick it 3 times and it doesn't break, I'm just gonna leave it.
Yeah.
But even if it's dead wood that's say 20 feet long, I'm gonna make it look really natural. start to make that angled cut on the top, and then just let it snap away, and then just leave it. Because think about that. How many times, you know, when a fir branch breaks, it typically is going to, you know, it's got that downward pressure, whether it's snow, wind, whatever it is, and then it breaks, and then it goes down end first.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's just because of the way that it's peeling away from the tree. That's just what happens. It goes down end first, and those stobs actually will a lot of times hang branches up. Right.
Oh,
so
nice.
they don't. So yeah, you may have to go up and get the branch, but it's also
It's still up
it's
in the
been
tree.
stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been because of the configuration of the branches and the angle at which it's going downward, and it hits these stobs. I've seen a lot of times where it's just hung that branch in the tree, and then you've got the opportunity to either go, you know, get a throw line in it and pull it out in the direction you want, or climb up, remove it, rig it down, whatever you got to do. But it's kind of a safety net, and I just love that natural look. Like and maybe it's just the way that my brain works, but I think of those gnarly old Doug Firs, those old growth ones, and when I see a Doug Fir that's like perfectly cleaned out, I'm just like, nope, that doesn't look right.
Nope.
Yeah.
And that deadwood, they've actually found the tree is pulling nutrients from that deadwood to reuse. So if you're removing all the deadwood, you might be removing some of the nutrients the tree is going to use to help it heal that wound.
Yeah, it's kind of a carbon sink, or carbohydrate sugar sink.
Yep.
Or bank.
So, you know, I like the idea of like take out the tip of it, take out that leverage. But, you know, if you're leaving a big stub, you can't kick it off. It's not going to hurt anything. And the tree is going to use that, you know, for its health.
Yeah. When I sell tree work, I sell like hazard mitigation, you know. So just like you were saying, that big limb it's over the, you know, area where the kids play or whatever. Yeah, it's hazardous, but you could totally take it back to the stub, have a nice, you know, stable thing on there that's not going to fall off and hurt anyone. But leave the deadwood whenever possible. It's my approach, because it doesn't need to come off. You're cutting on the tree. You're not making it healthier by removing the deadwood.
You're not.
You can, yeah.
Yeah, and we've all worked in those big Doug Firs, and like just the amount of branches, you're up on the top of the canopy, you're cutting like a few small little hangers out of the canopy. How many times on your way back down to the trunk do you have to fish that thing out again? Like it's never just, you just drop it and it falls to the ground. It's like you drop it and it gets hung up 20 feet below you, and then you drop it and 20 feet again.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to make a quick point going back to the common problems. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we have OSU, which is just an incredible resource for trees. So if you're here and you got a question we didn't answer, you know, head over there. They have this cool diagnosis table. So it's like Douglas fir, oak, and pine, and it'll say, so description, your Douglas fir, what's going on with it? Foliage is sparse, thinning, turning light green, yellow, and then it's got a big list of this could be what's going on. So check it out.
They've got a world-class forestry and plant pathology set up there. It's amazing. It's really amazing. OSU is a phenomenal institution.
It is.
Yeah, so for this part of the world, I would say go check them out. It's a great tool to have. Where do we go from there?
Random facts.
Yeah, let's go find some cool facts.
All right.
You know, one thing that's real cool, you don't really think about Doug Firs very often, but they are an incredible food source for the forest around them. You know, everything from the tree voles eating the needles. Porcupines, I think, eat the bark. Like, get into that cambium. There's food in there. A lot of rodents will eat the pine cones. You know, so you don't really think of Doug Firs as a food source, but they are.
They are, yeah.
And I think some of it is stuff humans could eat. I think we could eat, like in a survival situation. I'll bet the seeds are edible.
You can make tea out of the leaves.
Yep, tea out of the needles. I think some of the cambium you probably wouldn't want to make. You wouldn't want that to be the staple of your diet, or you might get a little clogged up. But there is nutrients within it that, you know, would be better than nothing in a survival situation.
And if you cooked it down enough, you could probably derive some kind of nutrients out of it. You know,
oh, guaranteed you could.
Make a pitch stew or something.
Yeah, again, it might not be a good long-term fix, but, you know, in a pinch, it'd be better than nothing.
I know there's a few gins on the market that have things like spruce, but Douglas fir is also one of those.
There's Douglas fir brandy.
Yes, and I've even had an ale that was a Douglas fir ale.
Ooh.
I actually went to a local liquor store because I was going to try to find some Douglas Fir booze for us tonight, but they did not have it in stock.
I've seen like ferocious,
Yeah,
ferocious, but I don't know if they have fur in it. Maybe
Doug Fir-licious.
that's
I feel
right,
like
ferocious. Yeah,
is that Deschutes? I feel like it has.
Let's
We got to look it up. We gotta look
For
it up.
sure.
But yeah, going back to the seed crop, or going back to the food source, like according to this, 65% of each annual seed crop is consumed by moles, shrews, and chipmunks. 65%
Wow.
of a seed crop, and like Doug firs are prolific seeders.
Oh yeah.
Like they have so many cones on them. Just think of how many seeds there are just spreading on the forest floor.
Yeah. Another cool random fact. Oh, you got something, Jamie?
No, I just think it's funny that I've had this laptop open and I'm only using it to Google beer.
just the important questions, Jay. Just the
Yeah,
important questions.
Yeah. So another cool fact is the ancient Hawaiians, there was no native firs in Hawaii, but it was a prized wood for them because these giant trees will wash up on their shores, and so they would use it to create canoes. So they get these giant logs, and it was a big deal when this big log, they'd make a bunch of canoes out of it, and it was a prized possession.
Probably preserved much the same way that we were talking about the ones sunk over in the Bay of Japan, right?
Oh, guaranteed. And you think about, in the size of the logs that were probably washing up in Hawaii, I mean, how many canoes could you make out of an old growth fir log washing up on Waikiki Beach?
I mean, at
what are the
least one,
chances?
right?
And what are the chances? Think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, Hawaii is a small island in a giant ocean.
Yeah.
Like, what, I'm sorry, but if there are Douglas fir washing up on Hawaii, like how many of those things are actually floating around out in the ocean total?
Yeah,
It's
or
gotta
just
be a
buried
lot
to
more.
the bottom,
Yeah.
perfectly preserved. Because
Unbelievable.
it'll preserve it for hundreds of years, right? So there's probably just amazing trees at the bottom of the Pacific.
Oh, there's got to be.
Wow.
One even made it into Loch Ness, and it's commonly seen.
Loch Ness just built a home out of it.
I am seeing a lot of beer recipes with Doug Fir, so
Oh,
All
yeah.
right. Well,
yeah, confirmed, and it's ferocious. Doug Ferocious.
ferocious. Okay. Not licious.
Yeah.
Ferocious. Doug Fir also played an important part in American history. So when the USS Constitution had to be rebuilt, they were out of white pine, eastern white pine, I believe. Eastern white pine weren't tall enough to build the masts, so the three masts on the USS Constitution are now Doug Fir.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
In the 1920s, I think they did that.
Well, we're here in Oregon. It was made our state tree in 1936.
And it's on our flag.
Yeah.
It's on our license
Our license
plate.
plates.
And it's on pretty much everything else that says
In our
Oregon.
beer.
In our beer.
Douglas Fir brandy. Has anyone tried that?
Well, I mean,
That
I know
sounds
what
rough.
I know what we're gonna try.
Yeah. We might have a rough podcast coming up.
If you want to listen to us drink an entire bottle of Douglas Fir brandy and then talk about trees, give us 5 stars. Like us. Follow us.
Or just send us a bottle of Douglas Fir brandy.
Or that too. You can do that too.
What's the tallest Doug fir you think you've climbed?
Well, the one that I climbed with you, the 307, 308,
307.
307.
Yeah, 307.
307.
Yeah, that'd be mine too.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's the same one.
Mm-hmm.
Same tree, yeah.
I climbed one that was about 320, right around there.
Yeah. Same.
But it is gone. It is
Burned
yeah,
up.
Yeah, it burned up
Oh, no.
in Fall Creek fires years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So is what it is.
Yep.
Should we maybe
300 Club, though. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
300 Club.
We're all there.
We're all
Yeah.
there.
Should we maybe do you have more facts, Corey?
I got another fact.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Pseudotsuga magricarpa, they are combining those two. They're making a hybrid with menziesii, right? Macrocarpa, the one down in Southern California. They're combining that, and they're finding that it produces the same a comparable lumber to just the menziesii, right? But it's more drought resistant.
That's good.
So
That's good.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the things we really haven't talked about is like what are the conditions that Doug fir would thrive in, right? And because we're seeing so many that are dying here in the Northwest, and we're finding that they're, to be honest, they kind of have a narrow slice that they really like to grow in as far as climate and just conditions in general. Because we're seeing they're not a very water tolerant tree in terms of heavy soil. Now, obviously, to say that they're not a water tolerant tree in the Northwest is a very broad generalization. But if you have a heavy clay soil in a very wet environment, Doug fir is not going to do well. And you see a lot of, you just see so many reprod plantings where that's all they plant is Douglas fir. I mean, they're blanketing hillsides in Douglas fir, and when you get down into the draws and into those creek beds, and if you have a heavier soil in those areas, they're not going to do well, right? So they don't do well in extreme heat like we've had here. Now, it's one thing if they're growing up on, say, the east side of the Cascades, and that's what they've grown up in. That's one thing. But when we have these big shifts in temperature, really extreme heat, it's very clear that they don't like that either, right? So they're not, for as abundant as they are, I guess this is a point that I'm trying to make, that as abundant as they are, they're not the most adaptable tree. They just really happen to be there in numbers, right?
Yeah.
And they're certainly not a climax tree in the Northwest forest, right? They're not shade tolerant, right? These are trees that are going to be some of the, they may not necessarily be a pioneer species, but they're not far from it.
Yeah.
Right? And
Well,
so
you think about one of the problems we have around here is you get the oak savannas that shade out the Doug firs, and they can't grow up through the oak canopies.
Bingo.
Yeah.
But because they're so fire adapted, and especially with that thick bark, that's their saving grace.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how they don't get out competed by more shade tolerant things like grand fir or hemlock. That otherwise would just kind of sit there and just slowly eke out their living in the shade. They're going to grow sparse and kind of tall and skinny, and the second one of those Doug fir topples, they are going to capitalize on that new sunlight, and those ultimately would be your more climax species in a much older forest. But it's really that big thick bark that they have that makes them so fire resistant. In general, we're just seeing so much die off here in the Northwest. It is becoming alarming, and especially when you couple that with the leaf scorch. I wouldn't be surprised if 100 years from now, Douglas fir is not going to be the dominant tree that it is right now. To be honest, what I see replacing it here in the Northwest, or at least on the west side of the Cascades, frankly, is Willamette Valley ponderosa pine.
Yeah, which are great trees too. I'll bet we'll be doing that one pretty damn soon.
And so who would think, let me ask you this, who would think that a ponderosa pine, now granted it's a Willamette Valley ponderosa pine, but it's still a ponderosa pine, would be more water tolerant than Doug fir? Most people would not believe that. And yet I've seen in incredibly heavy soils, Willamette Valley ponderosa pine thrive.
Wow.
And so, as our forests evolve, and as quickly as things are changing these days, I'm not a betting person, but I wouldn't be surprised if 100, 200 years down the road that Doug fir is no longer the dominant forest conifer here in the Northwest.
Yep. Yeah.
Bondi for the win.
I'm not betting against that.
Yeah.
Hey.
One final fact, as of 2012, the only wooden ships still currently in use by the United States Navy are Avenger-class minesweepers, and they're made of Douglas fir.
Cool.
So they're still defending America.
Yeah.
Nice.
At least from mines.
Is there anything that Douglas fir can't do? It's protecting America.
Well, apparently withstand drought.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Damn it.
Well, should we maybe do like stories from the field, like memorable stories you've had in a Doug fir to kind of wrap it up? Or do you got more to go?
I mean, no, I'm done.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to do kind of final thoughts?
Final thoughts, yeah.
A final thoughts be kind of a story, because
Sure. Yeah.
well, I guess we can take away from what we just learned on Doug fir. Yeah, let's do a final thought / talk about some time that you remember being in a fir that just changed your tree game.
Who's going for it? Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jamie, what you got?
Final thoughts. I'm super stoked to be doing these episodes. This podcast as a whole is making me a better arborist, and this format is going to make me a better arborist, and hopefully it helps other people. This has been super cool. But so it's stories about firs. I started tree work in Southern Oregon, and we were working on ponderosa pines mostly, and some, black oaks, ponderosa pines, cottonwoods. We didn't really have many Doug firs. They were kind of on the Cascades. Ashland, the town of Ashland kind of sits on the Siskiyou side in the Rogue Valley. So there's the Siskiyous and the Cascades. And we're dealing with a lot more pine and oak. And firs, I wasn't climbing that often. Once I moved to Eugene, I'm climbing a fir basically every day now. It's easily the most common tree that I work on. and it was kind of interesting learning to work on a fir. It was just totally different. Pines, typically the ponderosa pines, their branches don't act like a Doug fir branch, where it's like a Doug fir branch, 8-inch diameter, 40 feet long. You know, it's a little weird to get way out there. And it was just a cool experience learning how to move around a new tree. Mm-hmm. And now it's something I am doing every day of the week. Basically, I'm climbing a fir tree, learning how to rig, learning how to get stuff out of that upper canopy. Really grown to enjoy them. At first, I didn't. I was like, I gotta climb another fir. But now I'm starting to like getting around. The limb walks are super fun. Figuring out rigging is a lot of fun. So yeah, it's a cool tree. That's all I got.
So yeah, ditto to what you're saying. I'm really excited that we're going to be doing Tree of the Month. I haven't spent a lot of time on the podcast, and I was really excited to get the invite. And you know, as much as I love to climb, I'm a total nerd too when it comes to tree ID. So yeah, and I'm kind of a rare plant collector, and so this is really exciting for me to be here to be able to offer, you know, some info on this. But yeah, and just generally speaking, I mean, that, you know, Doug fir, it's one of my favorite trees. I mean, it's hard to pick a single favorite tree. And that's the case for most folks. But it's one of the trees that really brought me out here. You know, seeing these trees in photographs and in movies and on television. You know, I'm an Ohio native, and seeing this from a little kid, I knew from about the age of about 5 years old that I was going to wind up out here in the Northwest. And the Doug fir is just such an iconic piece of that. And yeah, so that's what I would say is that it's my favorite place to be is up in an old growth Doug fir, just looking over the beauty of the Cascades. They're just so magnificent, and I never get sick of them. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. You know, I just never get sick of them, and I always get so excited. I mean, I just, when I look at my GPS, I have so many of these things logged from just backcountry, you know, walking around, no trails out in the woods, and I just find these magnificent trees, and it's like, you know, nobody's probably seen this tree, or not many people have seen this tree ever, and it's just amazing. I have a really good catalog of these big trees, and it's just, it really is kind of what does it for me. I love them so much. So yeah, happy to be talking about them, and I'm really happy to be climbing in them here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, so I kind of echo Jamie's sentiment. I've you know, grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I've been a tree climber in the Pacific Northwest for my entire career. I've climbed other places, but that's, you know, 99.99% of my climbs have been here. So I've climbed in a lot of Doug firs, and I'm kind of at the point where, like, unless it's like an old growth, I'm not going to be enjoying it. Like, I really don't like working in Doug firs. Like, they're
pitchy.
It's hard.
They're pitchy. It is a challenge, and that's I appreciate the challenge about them. I don't appreciate actually doing it. I appreciate it afterwards, like going through, doing a big climb and being like, oh, great, I got through it. I did all this. It was tough, but I got through it. But actually, like, cutting the branches and have every single one like break, like when you're halfway through it, like trying to do a limb walk and then having the whole limb break. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of working on them. That being said, there is a really cool specimen here in town on Jackson and 10th, just south of 10th, kind of near Monroe Park. It's a weeping dwarf Douglas fir.
I know exactly the tree you're talking about.
And it's one of the biggest, you know, weeping dwarf Douglas firs I've seen. And that one just, like, I don't know, there was just something about it. I was like, what the hell? Is that a Douglas fir? That thing is...
The cultivar on that is called Graceful Grace. And if you're a tree nerd like me, Google that. We don't need to talk about it here. But, you know, picture's worth 1,000 words. But go Google it.
Graceful Grace.
Yeah, it's basically a Douglas fir that has... you actually have to prop the leader to get it to grow upright, but all the branches will grow very pendulous. They just droop straight down. And actually, if you don't stake that central leader, it'll actually just bow over and just start to grow prostrate on the ground. Which is pretty crazy.
Wow, I gotta plant me one of those at my place. At any rate, just the wide variety from the old growth to the, you know, stands of Doug firs that you'll see replanted for forestry to a Graceful Grace, like. What an incredible tree. Like, just how the wide variety of species and specimens that you'll see of this thing is just kind of mind-blowing to me, even though they're a pain to climb. Yeah. I still appreciate it. Also, one final fact. I had one more. In New Zealand, they're actually invasive. So.
Oh.
Interesting.
Invasive in New Zealand, so New Zealanders probably hate them.
Douglas bring them over there too.
Probably.
Yeah,
all
they're
his
just
fault.
the Ilanthus of New Zealand.
So eucalyptus are native or invasive here, and Douglas fir is invasive there. So
Fascinating.
touche.
Wow.
Touche.
Touche.
Little biological warfare going on there.
Well, I think for my final thoughts, one, just echoing everything you guys are saying, this is awesome doing a tree of the week. As someone who's always been really production oriented in the field, most of my knowledge is on doing the work, on the rigging, on the climbing. And so this is just such a great opportunity for me to learn more about individual trees and really dive deep into them. And so I really look forward to doing these episodes. And it's awesome. And we're just starting it. Who knows where this is all going to go. And kind of, the last 22 years I've been climbing trees in Eugene. So Douglas fir is such a staple of it. It is the smell of it, the taste of the needles, the
That yummy taste.
iconic for me. You know,
It really is.
the workflow of, if you give me like 100-foot Doug fir removal, it might be where I'm most dialed in on doing a removal, just, with my eyes closed. So it's really fun kind of talking about these trees and going to another level and learning new stuff about them, because the Doug fir is tree work in Eugene, Oregon. It really is just what it is. So
I think a company could make a living just doing furs.
the fur expert.
Yeah.
I only work in Doug firs. That's it.
Well, Furlicious is the company
Ferocious or Furlicious?
I like Furlicious.
Yeah, that's way better.
Phenomenal. But it's just it's a very fitting first tree of the month for a podcast based in Eugene, Oregon. So with that, I'm going to say stay safe and stay out of them bull pits.
Awesome.